Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. This week, we have a very special co-host. Well, you guys have gotten used to him by now, but on the way other coast up north, we have Jonathan Schwartz from Slam Wrestling and his column. What's the column again? It's
Wrestler's Court with Jonathan
Wrestler's
Schwartz.
Court. Wrestler's Court. So something that we've seen a lot of, wrestlers having to deal with the legal system, and certainly something will be a topic for tonight. But first of all, want to mention the most important thing, and that is playoff fever here in the Bay Area, and the 49ers winning yesterday's game over Seattle 41-17, and I don't care about the rest of the people who are watching. I care about the fact that I'm a 49er fan, and that was a tremendous game yesterday. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it or not up in Canada.
I did. I do have to admit that my football watching is severely constrained by a couple of young people who are much more into Harry Potter at this point than George Kittle, but I'll let that slide. By coincidence, actually, it turns out that all the way up from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, I happen to be a bit of a 49ers fan as well. I started watching football back in the day when it was Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and John Taylor and all those guys, and I got hooked, and they've always been my team.
My uncle had season's tickets when I was growing up, so I got to see not just the Joe Montana and Steve Young years are kind of midway through the years that I watched them. I watched them in the early 70s with guys like Steve DeBerg and Jim Plunkett, and watching O.J. Simpson take handoffs in his last couple of years as a running back, and of course at the time we didn't have any idea what kind of an S show O.J. Simpson was going to turn out to be, but he wasn't a very good player for us. That's certainly something. And so the 49ers growing up for me were always this losing team that tried hard, but as my dad used to refer to them, he used to say they would snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, that they would find ways to lose novelly every single week, especially to opponents that they should have beaten. And they were always bridesmaids, but never a bride. And then, in 1981, I was there. We had seen them watch. I watched them lose for about 8 years in a row at home, in every set of circumstances that you could see. The Niners up by a bunch and then losing by a Hail Mary touchdown, to being down by a lot and losing by like 20, 35 points. And then finally, the Niners played the Rams, and Ray Wersching kicked a last-second field goal in 81, and they won. And I was like, I can't believe it. We won a game at home that I watched. It was unbelievable to us. And of course, then they went on to win the Super Bowl. And then my other little claim to fame is up until the 90s, every time that I'd seen them win in person, they would go on to win the Super Bowl. My uncle was like happy about giving my brother and myself tickets, because it's like, if you guys see a win, then we're going to a Super Bowl win. And so this jacket is from my dad. It's an old chalk line jacket from the early 80s when we won one of our early, I think from the 84-85 Super Bowl, when we beat Dan Marino in Miami. So
I've got my starter version upstairs, actually. I got it when, after years in the wilderness, including a stint by former Canadian Football League quarterback
Doug Flutie?
No, Doug Flutie wound up playing for the Bills, but around that same time, the NFL teams just started rating the CFL of quarterbacks. So it was Jeff Garcia had a stint as a 49er quarterback after.
And he played with The Rock. That's an interesting little
Well, he played in Calgary for years before that, and he'd actually been pretty successful there. But when the Niners had that march through the playoffs with Colin Kaepernick, I really got back into it.
Now
I'm
that
still a
is the
little bit
most
bitter about
Canadian
how that turned out.
pronunciation of his name. That's the most Canadian pronunciation of his name that I've ever heard.
I'll roll with
We
it.
all call him Colin Kaepernick here, but that was so Canadian of you. I love that. But continue.
Oh, that's okay. I will defer to I will defer to the locals. Um, no, but I really got back into it when he started, and he was just, you know, every so often you'll want a player will come into the league, quarterback particularly, who's just so incredibly athletic and has a different way of looking downfield and can basically just take a game on his shoulders and run with it. And I really had thought that at the time that was the guy, and that was kind of going to lead us back to the promised land, as it were. Unfortunately, life seemed to get in the way, although he seems to be doing pretty well for himself outside of the NFL.
Now I've actually
We reeled off like a streak of like 10 wins after an incredibly mediocre start and a lot of injuries to start the season off.
I'm probably one of the few Americans that you know of that's seen a Canadian football game, because I used to go see the Gold Miners when they were in Sacramento. I don't know if you ever watched the Gold Miners out in.
So up here, when the CFL decided to expand into the U.S., it was incredibly controversial, and it didn't really happen. It didn't really help matters much that within a matter of a couple of years, a lot of the U.S. teams went the way of the old American Basketball Association teams, that there was just no stability in ownership. And, there was a hope that for going into a bunch of cities, Baltimore being the big one, that they actually won a Grey Cup, I think, where, people were dying for football after it had been taken away from them. This was in the interregnum between the Colts and the Ravens in Baltimore. And Canadian fans resented it. It just never really took in the U.S., I think partly because the rules were just so bizarre to an American audience, and it was just a different product.
We never understood the Rouge.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I don't understand the rule. My dad, who is in fact American, makes the point that the CFL is the only league that rewards people for failure. So
we do have ties, but that's about as close as you can get. And of course, sometimes when you talk about how big the contracts are, the TV contracts are, so there's some pretty bad teams that still wind up making money in the NFL. So we do reward failure in some ways out here, but not in the game itself.
If Evan were here, and I imagine he's here in spirit right now, he'd bring up the Knicks.
Oh yeah. Well, he's in spirit, all right. He's down in San Diego, so it's one of the rare times he's actually on the West Coast. But he asked me, he said, "Oh, can you come down and visit me while I'm down in San Diego?" And I had to remind him that from the difference between San Diego and San Francisco, distance-wise, is the same distance between New York and North Carolina.
In fairness, we get that a lot up here too. Somebody will come and say to me, "I've got a friend who's out in Vancouver. Do you know him?" And that's clear across the country. That's way on the West Coast, and we're pretty much Eastern.
Oh, I know. I've been to Banff, and Banff is nothing like Toronto. It's about as far across as you can get, from one coast to the other.
I can get to Las Vegas as quickly as I can get to Banff or to Vancouver. Put it that way.
Yeah, I believe it. Although I would rather spend time in Banff than Las Vegas. I'll tell you that much. Banff is one of the nicest cities I've ever been to in my life, and if I could somehow, but I guess it's now gotten to be crazily expensive out there, like it would be San Francisco or Los Angeles or Seattle or so forth.
I think that's everywhere. I think that the cost of doing business generally, as I imagine we're going to discuss shortly, has just gotten incredibly high on every front right now.
Oh yeah, but Canada, it's a country I really admire, and but we've gotten a real dose of Canadian type weather here in California for the last gosh, almost the last month, it's rained continuously, except for 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, I heard the president just called a state of emergency for California.
Well, in some parts, there's serious flooding that's gone on because we've had for the last 3 years almost no rain. 1 year in December, we got 1/10 of an inch of rain, which is like 3 centimeters worth of rain for an entire month. In fact, that year we got more rain in July than we got in December. And, for the first time in recorded history, like even going back to Native American times, they had never seen Mount Shasta here in Northern California with no snow on it in the summertime. But there was not a speck of snow. And we were really hurting out here. And then, of course, the trend is drought, fires. Then we get so much rain, we don't know what to do with it. So everything burned down because there was no moisture anywhere in Northern California. We had the terrible Napa fires, and a couple of years ago we had what was called the Camp Fire, which cut everything. I mean, we were all stuck inside because of COVID, and it was 105 degrees, and you couldn't go outside because the air quality was worse than downtown Beijing. And so now, after all that, we get tons of rain.
Always something. I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah, except I can't. If we may get a power outage during the show, so I can't guarantee that everything will stay up. We were out for about 20 minutes yesterday, and I don't know what will happen. What'll happen today? But so far so good. At least I'm on top of a hill, so if it floods my house, then all of Marin County is going to be in big trouble, and we hope that doesn't happen. But hopefully one of these days, in between disasters, you'll have a chance to come visit here, because I think Canadians love Northern California. They just tend to fall in love with this place. Canadians and Brits love this part of the country.
Sounds good.
So let's talk about the giant elephant in the room, the thing that everyone is talking about, the thing that's on everybody's mind, and that is, of course, in 2 battle royales, we had ladies walk on their hands instead of having both feet touch outside, and they were able to do that thing where they put their legs around the ring post or the ropes and pull themselves back in, a la Kofi Kingston. That's in 2 separate battle royales.
Who knew that he was such a trendsetter?
But is that something that because I've seen outrage by people. I mean, absolute outrage by people on the internet saying that they have to change the rules of battle royale so that one hand equals both hands on the floor is the equivalent of both feet on the floor, or that you have only 1 foot on the floor, or if you land on your back, that you're considered out officially, that it can't be just 2 feet, the literal 2 feet on the floor being the elimination in a battle royal or a Royal Rumble. What do you say?
See, I think lawyer to lawyer, I appreciate whenever people find a way to manipulate the rules. I think that the fact that we spent so long, you would run a battle royale basically as an excuse to get Andre the Giant into a ring and not have to go out of it. And the fact that you have all of these different ways to game the match now, I think just makes a much more wildly entertaining format. I mean, you could say the same thing. For example, Dalton Castle has made it a spot in multiple battle royals where he'll almost get tossed out, and the boys will kind of carry him around the ringside area and drop him back on in. And I've got to tell you, I pop for it every single time. I think that maybe it's my corporate background, so to speak, but I always appreciate a good way to kind of operate within the letter of the law, if not the spirit of it. And I think these kind of spots just kind of add something to what would ordinarily be have become a pretty predictable kind of match. Do I need to see it necessarily in every card? No. But I think that what we're talking about when we see people using the same spot across multiple battle royals, like you're saying, speaks more to the fact that there's a bit of a lack of coordination and creativity as people are kind of going about their business. I think, for example, like if you look across Raw or SmackDown or NXT, you see a lot of the same match results or storylines or characters kind of popping up across one to the next to the next. And I think that there has to be a little bit of a better job kind of watching what other people are doing and trying to create a little bit of breathing room between that.
Or
but
even
so
on
far
their,
as the spots
even
go,
on
I
their
love
own
them.
cards, even on their own cards.
Yeah.
Like I find AEW has a lot of match similarities. Like you'll see a match maybe early in the card, and then 4 or 5 matches in, you see a match that looks and feels like it's the same match. You know, you see a lot of the same moves, see a lot of the same holds, and you see almost the same kind of outcome.
Well, I think it's a function of who you've got working on a given card. I mean, I like Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley tends to have pretty much the same match over and over. He relies on the same few spots. You know, 10 minutes in, he's going to drop his hands and he's going to get into a slap fight with his opponent. You know that if you give him, 20 minutes, by about 17, 18 minutes, his face is going to be a crimson mask, as Gordon Soley would have said. Daniel Bryan has his pet spots that he wants, or Bryan Danielson, I should say, has his pet spots that he wants to get in. And these are the guys who are featured week to week on the card. So you're going to see a lot of the same stuff. I love AEW. I think that the format that they've kind of landed on, and as far as I'm concerned, it works pretty well for them, is first match is going to be hot and generally a pretty good technical acrobatic showcase for whoever's in it. Towards the end, you're going to have another really good match, and there's guaranteed going to be one really great promo in the mix, especially if MJF is on. But the rest of it doesn't necessarily feel as thought through as those parts of it. And you have a lot of guys who are kind of trained in what I'm kind of starting to consider to be a bit of a new style, which is intensely athletic and intensely acrobatic. And as great as the moves are, and as much as they seem to defy physics, you watch Young Bucks or Kenny Omega or, Lucha Brothers or any of these guys, and they're all borrowing so heavily from each other's styles that it does all start to look a little bit similar to each other. But it's still awesome to watch.
Yeah, it's I guess I still haven't gotten in on Orange Cassidy. I'm not sure why. His style is just something I haven't really embraced in the same way. So a lot of times when I see his matches, I'm kind of bored of what he brings to it. But a lot of the other guys, are pretty impressive overall. I also wanted to find out who you thought was your favorite NFL player turned wrestler in any Fed. Who do you think, or you know what, any other additional pro athlete from another sport that then joined wrestling? Who is your favorite? Who do you think was the best one?
That's a good one. All time, I would probably say Ernie Ladd, if only because he was very successful as a football player, and I think his accomplishments in wrestling vastly outstripped what he even did on the gridiron. Very capable of working well as a face. Excellent heel. Some of the best promos I've ever seen.
I would agree. He's the best promo maker. And
for as huge a man as he was, and I don't think that you necessarily understand that unless you actually go back and watch his stuff from back in the day. I mean, he was so much bigger than anybody in the ring. He was
6'8", 6'9".
Yeah. And you could stack him up legitimately in a match against Andre the Giant or Don Leo Jonathan or any of those guys, and it would look credible. And the guy could bump. And one of the things that I find really interesting about heels from that era, Ladd would be one example. The other one that I always come back to is Superstar Billy Graham, who was also a big guy in his own right, and one of the
sadly on death's door, from what I read.
Oh, I hope not. I know he's not doing well health-wise.
Very close. We may get the bad news. I keep expecting bad news about Superstar Billy Graham every week, and somehow he makes it. But I've heard he's in really critical condition right now.
I'm sorry to hear that. He's one of my all-time favorites. I mean, I grew up as a Hulk Hogan fan, and then I learned where Hulk Hogan got Hulk Hogan from. And if you watch his stuff, he's basically, Bizarro World mirror image villainous version of Dusty Rhodes. And the two of them against each other, and the way that their patter worked was just brilliant and so far ahead of its time. But back to my initial point, both he and Ernie Ladd, if you watch them as heels, despite being so much bigger and physically imposing and so far ahead of the game compared to most of the guys they were in the ring with, neither of them was afraid to bump like heck for their opponents. So you would see, Ernie Ladd in there against, pick a guy, and he'd be flopping all over the ring and selling the heck out of the other guy's moves. So when it came time for him to win, it actually looked like he was beating someone and it was meaningful. And the same thing goes for Graham. And Graham wasn't nearly as much of a ragdoll kind of bumper as Ernie Ladd could be when he wanted to, but he would do the same thing. And it always struck me as a very different proposition than what you see a lot of more kind of monster heels do today, where they're just not, I don't know if it's that they're necessarily not as athletic, but they're not called upon to do the same kind of thing. The main guy who I think really plays that role today, and I know a lot of people don't like him, is someone like Baron Corbin, who, whatever his deficit, who's a former, I think he was on the Kansas City Chiefs taxi squad too, who may not be, whatever his other deficits may be, he certainly can go in the ring if he were allowed to.
I think the Corbin situation reminds me sort of what went on with Roman Reigns, which is that it was sort of like someone that was a favorite of Vince's, that he sort of said, you're going to like this guy or you're going to hate this guy, regardless of how you feel. And I'm going to push him in every event for, a 2 to 3 year period. And, you're not going to have any choice. And he got overexposed. He was on so much. And people, I think, really took a disliking to him because they didn't want to be told by Vince that this is someone you're going to root for, or this is someone you're going to root against. People just don't like being forced that. They like to feel like they have something to do with helping make somebody a champion or make them a top heel by rooting for them or against them. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the weird thing with Corbin is that for all of the TV time that he's gotten, he's had, at least from the fans' point of view, relatively little success. I mean, he had a very brief run with the U.S. title. He won King of the Ring long after it really meant anything. It just became another in a series of gimmick changes for him. And let's face it, the King of the Ring has been, I think, more of a curse to the people who've held it than anything lately. You go back to Sheamus or Bad News Barrett or Corbin or Xavier Woods, who won it just recently and then was injured, and they came back without mentioning it at all. So he won Money in the Bank and promptly lost his title shot. It's, he's on TV a lot, but in terms of doing anything that would actually get people's attention and hold it, I don't think that he's really had that much of an opportunity. And I think a lot of that, too, comes from the fact that, at least to me, he's just overbooked. I mean, physically, again, leaving aside whether he's anywhere near as great a worker or heel or has had a chance to become like that, physically, he reminds me a lot of that old kind of Killer Kowalski kind of heel. Tall, rangy, big guy, deceptively quick, can do stuff if he's allowed to do it. But again, they keep focusing on these weird storylines where he always gets his comeuppance. So he hasn't had any really significant title runs to speak of. In terms of the programs that he's had, I can think of the one where with Lacey Evans versus him and Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch, when they were first really awkwardly acknowledging that they were an item off screen. He had a program with Roman Reigns where he fed Reigns dog food because of the whole, big dog nickname. There hasn't really been anything for him that feels organic. And the weird thing I think with him too is I happen to follow him on Instagram, on social media, and I've got to say, from what I've seen, he's a likable guy. And I apologize if I'm, going against a whole 6, 7 years of narrative here. But dude likes cooking. Dude likes scotch. Dude has an impressive watch collection, and I happen to like watches too. I mean, this is somebody who I can relate to. But there's never been an opportunity to kind of see. I think they hedged it a little bit with the millionaire character, but I think they've retreated away from it by pairing him with JBL. And it's just a really odd and awkward pairing. And I like JBL, and I think that in the right context, he's an effective voice. But I hate him as a manager standing next to another wrestler because he's so big and he makes anybody else, including Corbin, who's a huge guy himself, he makes everybody else look small, and that's not helpful.
Right. No, that was one thing that they always said was positive about me as a manager. They said, no one ever is going to think that you're going to be getting in the ring and pushing anybody around yourself. You look schleppy enough, and I've got that whole Jim Cornette, Jimmy Hart, Andy Kaufman vibe. So nobody worried about me looking bigger. They had an announcer. This guy was doing announcing for the APW, and he's a great guy, but he's like 6'3". And they always, said one of the big problems with him announcing was that he made the other wrestlers look really small in comparison. So that was one reason why my brother got some announcing opportunities, because he, like myself, is not big and imposing, and nobody, looked at him. He's got, the Howard Finkel hairstyle going. So, he didn't exactly intimidate anybody getting in the ring and doing the announcing. Sometimes those things are important to promoters.
I think as a fan that it's important too in maintaining the illusion that we're here to watch basically superheroes fight. At least that's the image that I've had as long as I've been a fan. I mean, you want the people in the ring to be larger than life. And I know we're at a point now where we really don't want to, comment on people's physical appearances or things that they can't really change. And I fully understand that. I do think that, AEW, you mentioned Orange Cassidy before. I think that it's part of the issue that takes you out of the show that he's portrayed as being such an average dude. And that's his whole character. He's average. He doesn't care. He just kind of, sidles his way to the ring. He carries his the All Atlantic, I think it is, championship in a backpack. And, to a point, it's funny, but it also makes sense for him to be the character in the promotion filling that role. And I think right now in AEW, you've got a few people who occupy that similar space where it's the smaller guy who's getting over with a really kind of out there gimmick. And I enjoy Cassidy. I actually was in Toronto for the match where he won the belt from Pac. And I was surprised that they would put a title on him. But I'll say this, you've got him, you've got Hook, who's awesome, but again, a much smaller guy at the beginning of his career. You've got Danhausen, who I think is one of the best indie gimmicks ever, but who's also, again, smaller, less physically imposing, compensating for it with a really interesting and dynamic character. And, I think you've got more than a few people on that roster who kind of play that similar role.
In fact, that was one of the things that surprised me when I started meeting professional wrestlers. I was like, gosh, I'm surprised I'm that much bigger, taller than some of these guys. On TV, a lot of times, especially when they match people up against each other, and the smaller wrestlers like Rey Mysterio, but your average wrestler is still only about maybe 5'10" to 6'1". They're not all 6'9", 6'10", giant monsters, as much as WWE had that trend.
And in fairness, a lot of WWE's fixation on size was puffery too. I mean, Hogan was built as being 6'8", 303 pounds. Legitimately, Hogan's about the same size as Vince McMahon, who I think is actually around 6'1", 6'2". So they've always, you can go back even pre-Hogan when you had Vince McMahon interviewing Andre the Giant, and Andre was standing on a box to make him look that much taller. So there's always been a pretty strong element of puffery in trying to make the talent look larger than life. But when you have so many people who are playing basically the same role, it's the same way, on a different note, at one point having John Cena be the guy wrestling in jean shorts made him stand out. When you've got everybody wrestling in street clothes, it ceases to define him as a character. And to me, it just kind of comes across as, well, where's the professional part of professional wrestling? I can remember even a few years after that, when the Shield broke up and you had Dean Ambrose in his street fighting gimmick wearing tank top and jeans, and he's in a feud with Luke Harper from the Wyatt family, and Harper's wearing the exact same outfit. And then it feels, well, this is almost kind of like prom, isn't it? And it doesn't quite register as a professional wrestling match the same way.
Yeah, no, there is something to be said about the tights and the boots, and as you said, would you feel the same about Superman if he didn't have the cape and the big ass and the short shorts and the blue tights and all that stuff? There is something that you get as a package, and we've all been sold the superhero package, so.
Well, and there have been attempts to recast Superman and to give him and to update the wardrobe. In the early mid-90s, when they actually killed Superman off briefly.
That's in the comics, not in the movies.
Yes. No, not in the movies. And within the comics, they actually introduced a new Superboy character who, had the ST shirt and a leather jacket and jeans and was fighting crime in that getup. And more recently, they've done the same thing. There's a show, I think, on whatever the successor to the WB is, where Superman's kids are Superman, and they're out being Superman with the powers, wearing hoodies and jeans.
Are you talking about Smallville?
Nope. Smallville was a few years ago. This is called Superman and Lois. It just started about 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, I gotta say I haven't seen it.
I like it. And interestingly,
I'm more of a Marvel guy, to be honest with you. I'm more of the Marvel comics type than I am DC, to be honest with you. If that makes a difference.
I like both comics. I think Marvel Head and Shoulders does the better movies, and DC, at least when they had the Arrowverse going, had far and away the better TV shows. And I have no idea why. I can't stand the DC movies, to be honest. I can't even stand
Black Adam's one of the worst movies I've seen in about the last 10 years, I would say.
But it wasn't supposed to be a good movie.
No, but what it
no
was
offense, in case The Rock happens to be one of the dozens and dozens of viewers of this podcast.
He's not. I can tell you that much. I know.
Oh, come on. But we'd be great entertainment for a cheap meal.
Yeah, I thought that that Black Adam was totally derivative. It was one of the movies that I can say there's not one single surprise or something that's novel that you would see in Black Adam, and it really didn't need to have The Rock in it. They could have had Vin Diesel or anybody else play that character. There was nothing that The Rock brought to that character that I thought took advantage of his acting skills, his ability to be friendly and fun. He shouldn't be cast as a bad guy, because I think that he really is, or if he's a bad guy, he needs to be kind of an over-the-top, egotistical bad guy than the subdued one that they had him be in Black Adam. Just didn't seem to take advantage of his skills. What do you think? Unless you haven't seen it.
I don't disagree with you, but again, I think that the whole point of that movie was the spectacle of The Rock in an actual superhero movie. And I think that The Rock became The Rock by playing a cool heel. And I think that's basically what they were trying to do with Black Adam.
But as a cool heel, he always was like, he used his speech, and can you smell what The Rock is cooking? And it doesn't matter what you think. And the turn the some bitch sideways and stick it up your candy ass, phraseology, which there's
Right,
none
but
of that in Black Adam.
Right, but that's also the same way that in pretty much any action movie that The Rock's been in since day one, they'll do a spot where he rock bottoms somebody as an Easter egg to the wrestling fans. I think that at some point you want to try something else. I think that the draw, at least so far as the character went, is also, if you remember Black Adam from the comic books, he looks a lot like The Rock does.
He does. That part, look-wise, he was right on target.
And there aren't many, even within, and I think it's changing now, and I think a lot of, frankly, incels are disappointed that it's changing. There aren't a lot of roles that would work for somebody who looks like The Rock. And this happened to be one that came up and has been part of the canon for a while now, and that hasn't been exploited yet. My familiarity with Black Adam as a character is basically he's one of the main antagonists to Captain Marvel, to Shazam. I don't remember him being in this more kind of anti-hero kind of position. I think that kind of was massaged by the fact that The Rock took an interest in it, and you can't just cast him as a bad guy too, because if he was thinking of turning it into a franchise, which apparently he was until the DC universe was upended, and we'll get, I guess, into other universes being upended shortly, you can't make him a bad guy because either he wins and takes over the world and there's not really room for a second movie, unless we're talking Terminator post-apocalyptic kind of stuff, or he gets killed at the end. And then you've basically wasted the world's biggest grossing actor in a one and done. So I think that there are structural problems.
Oh, superheroes always die and come back. That's one thing that you and I, as comic book readers, know, that you're never quite dead, no matter what happens to you. It's always a clone or an alien impersonator or a robot or something like that. That you can say that, well, you thought you saw the original guy get killed, but that was really an alien that transformed or a mutant that had the ability to shapeshift and looked exactly like him or something like that. Both Marvel and DC are way guilty of pulling that clone thing out from
or the version that I think we get a lot of now is the whole multiverse.
Yeah, that was in another universe that happened, but in this universe, everything's fine.
And I have to tell you, when the whole multiverse concept was first introduced, I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
I hated it.
I was probably a fair bit. I was a kid. I have to tell you now, I just think in a lot of cases it excuses some pretty lazy storytelling and unpopular decision making.
Yes.
And it's made a lot of the properties that I really used to love and be engaged with, it's made them unwatchable for me, because what good is Peter Parker if there's an infinite number of Peter Parkers across an infinite number of universes? And why do I need to be attached to this particular version of a character? The one exception to that is I saw Into the Spider-Verse when it came out.
That's my daughter's favorite movie.
Which I have to say, of any of the comic book adaptations, especially since there's been this glut of them, is probably one of my favorite movies, comic book or no, just because
it's actually really well done. But it also has this ability not to take itself too seriously. That was kind of one of the better parts of it, is that, by including Peter Porker, and I was a fan of Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham. To have that element.
And Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, and Nicolas Cage's character was.
I have to tell you,
noir
as much. Exactly. And as much as we may think that The Rock and Black Adam wasn't great casting, Nicolas Cage in Ghost Rider is an absolute treasure.
Well, okay, you're the only person. He was great in Noir Spider-Man, but I'm off I don't think he was good in Ghost Rider, but I thought that whole the whole set of movies that they had were just off.
Ghost Rider, it said, wasn't a great movie, but him playing that role, frankly, he's just one of those actors who choose the scenery no matter what he's in. And
he was originally thought to be cast as Superman for The Wrestler.
Oh,
he
yeah,
was supposed to be the instead of Mickey Rourke. Nicolas Cage was interested in being the wrestler in the wrestler?
studio wanted him. Darren Aronofsky wanted Mickey Rourke from the get-go, and the studio wanted Nicolas Cage, and he was
Bigger
involved.
name.
I think. Sorry.
Nicolas Cage
Exactly.
is the bigger name.
And he decided he just couldn't do the role justice.
Well, they looked at him and they said, "You look too good. You just don't look." I mean, Mickey Rourke really looked run down because, to be honest with you, life has run him down. You know, he has the scars and the look of a rundown indie wrestler, whereas Nick Cage, you know, is too pretty. He doesn't have all the scars and the wrinkles and the bruises and the bumps that Mickey Rourke's own life prior to being in the wrestler, you know, did. And it's interesting that if you look back on it, Mickey Rourke and the wrestler, Mickey Rourke still hasn't done something of the impact that the wrestler has had. That still maybe might be his magnum opus.
Well, he's also very much kind of made his own choices career-wise. I think you can. I mean, by the same token, you can look at Nicolas Cage, and he's had considerable success both in big pictures and small, but he's also, there was an article in GQ about him a few months ago, and he's taken on in the last few years something like 30, 40 roles just to help pay off a considerable tax debt. And he's through that now, and he's doing more projects that really speak to him. But his idea of a project that speaks to him, for example, if I understand correctly, is he's playing Dracula in a movie about Renfield, Dracula's lackey, which I desperately want to go see because I think it's going to be just bonkers.
The story that actually really has never been told, as much as the Dracula story has been overtold, Renfield's always been sort of just, you know, put on the side there, and they never really talk about him. So it should be interesting. Okay, so let's move on to the main course. We've had enough appetizers. Want to give you?
I think we got through the end everything.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. You have something to say about everything, so you're a perfect guest host to have on for this week. But now, the big news that everybody's talking about, other than the NFL playoffs, and that is Vince McMahon coming back as president of the WWE, and then the news that the WWE may in fact be sold. So let's first talk about column A, which is Vince McMahon coming back, which I felt was was as predictable as, you know, the plot of Black Adam. You know, it was something that didn't surprise me at all, and I'm surprised it even took him that many months. What, less than 6 months after, you know, saying he was stepping down, he stepped right back in to it. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I actually spent a fair bit of time on it in my most recent column, Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz on slamwrestling.net. I will say, the way I started the column is basically there's a difference between that which is right and that which is legal. And Vince McMahon, as a primary shareholder of the corporation that is WWE, had every right to do that. Was it necessarily the right thing to do? Certainly, so far as fans are concerned, I don't think so. But it is, you know, this is his baby, and he structured the initial public offering of WWE when, you know, well, it was many years ago, so that he never lost the ability to maintain that degree of control if he needed it. And lo and behold, the day came where he did. I think the fact that he came back and overtook Stephanie and Paul Levesque, Triple H, and booted people off the board, and other members of the board wound up resigning, including the members of the board who oversaw the internal investigation over his alleged sexual misconduct. I think it hurts the company. I think that it hurt, if a sale is ultimately in the offing, I think his presence actually hurts it. I think that it's one more in a series of black eyes to the company, to be honest. And I think that part of it is fueled by the fact that, at least according to rumor, he believes that the advice that he got in the wake of the scandal that broke back over the spring and summer, that he needed to step away from the company in the interest of maintaining its value, after
But he just couldn't hold it back. You know,
No.
he's like a kid with a toy that, you know, is his favorite toy. You know, you say for your own good, you have to stop playing with this thing. And I bet you the hardest thing in the entire world would have been hanging out at the McMahon household for the last 6 months while Vince McMahon was supposedly off of the WWE. He probably paced back and forth, and he probably, you know, was stomping his feet and throwing, you know, glasses around the, you know, and food around the house, and you know, probably was just an impossible grump to live with. Now, you know, Linda McMahon doesn't live with Vince these days, so I don't know who got stuck, you know, having to deal with Vince's daily tantrums, but I bet you he was the grumpiest old man not being in charge of the WWE and seeing it succeed without him, with Triple H doing arguably a better job of running the show than Vince was.
Well, I think that it's been his life to the detriment of everything else for the last however many years. And I think it's also worth knowing he was born into this. I think that there's this, the narrative is that he created the WWE from whole cloth, and he didn't. He didn't inherit, I shouldn't say that. He bought out his father's New York-based promotion. So he had a foothold in the arguably biggest, most lucrative territory in the US at the time. His dad was a tough negotiator with him and threatened that if Vincent couldn't turn a profit, he would wind up taking it back from him. So there was always a degree of risk there. But this has been his life since he was a teenager. And I don't know from his perspective, and I know, you know, others will point to the many allegedly shady or underhanded dealings that he's been involved with over the years, and the way he's treated talent and the way that he's handled scandals before, and including this. But I just don't think he knows anything else. And for a man in his late 70s, early 80s, he's not going to be one of the grandpas who goes and hangs out and has a senior's coffee at McDonald's for 4 hours. He's tried to create other properties, XFL being a prime example, and he tried to resurrect that a few years ago, and now that's been bought out by The Rock, which I think may be where we're headed with WWE ultimately, depending on how things break. I don't think he can really do anything else. So it is, again, may not be right, but I think that there's a point past which it's understandable. And as money-driven as he may be, and as he's shown he's capable of being, I think there's something else there in terms of this is what he's devoted his life to.
It's true, but you know, then when you, but you know, certainly Stephanie McMahon, Shane McMahon, you know, they have also had their lives pretty much, you know, all shaped by being part of the WWE or the WWF, WWE, and even Triple H, you know, for the most part. I mean, what would he be without the WWE being in his life? So all of those people have those same, you know, major things as part of it. So it's you know, Vince McMahon wanting to take the spotlight over other people who have arguably done better and earned more of the spotlight than Vince McMahon has, especially because they haven't sexually harassed the same number of people that Vince has. You know, that's one of the things, is bringing him back and you know, kind of plastering over everything that he did is something that, you know, I think still doesn't sit that well with a lot of fans, especially when you have the alternative in Tony Khan, who, you know, despite being kind of egotistical, hasn't been as mean to the talent, hasn't been as mean to the people who are around him as Vince has. You know.
Well, so I think that comparing Vince to Tony Khan isn't fair on a few levels. And I'm not trying by any means to be an apologist for Vince. I think that what Vince did was absolutely the wrong call. I think it shows a tremendous lack of self-awareness on his part, a lack of awareness about the nature of what he did, to the extent that it's been proven, certainly. And it shows an incredible lack of business sense for somebody who's defined himself in terms of his business acumen, in terms of what it's going to do to the company going forward. That said, Tony Khan has run a wrestling company for 5 years. And he's, he also comes from a place where the resources to create this wrestling company come from family money as well. So Khan hasn't necessarily had the opportunity to make the same mistakes that Vince has over the years, and I would hope he doesn't. I would hope that he would learn from
some
others'
of those things
experiences.
some of those mistakes, a lot of those mistakes that Vince did were because of his ego and because of how, he is basically really a poor man's dictator. When you want to, he has a lot of money, but he's the dictator of a business, not a country. I'm sure if Vince, could take over a country, he would, and he would run it pretty much like North Korea. I think if he did run his own country.
I think Vince McMahon did run a country until about starting in 2016.
Yeah, with Trump in charge, yeah, I'm not surprised. So then the other big topic.
And just to clarify, that's not saying Vince was pulling the strings, although that would have been awesome. I think if you look at Trump's campaign and you look at his style of bluster and the public appearances and everything, Trump basically stole his political persona directly from professional wrestling.
Yeah, I think you're
right down to appearing, with in a long overcoat and theme music a la Undertaker.
I'm surprised he didn't pick Vince McMahon to be his vice president. That would have been more appropriate,
Well, Vince was Linda was head of the Small Business Administration.
Yeah, and look at what a great job she did. It's that administration just completely fell apart. But let's talk about the other side of the sale of the WWE. And the big question is, first of all, is it going to be sold? And second of all, who are they going to sell it to? Of course, the biggest controversy is possibly it being sold to Saudi Arabia, to the royal family in Saudi Arabia. What are your thoughts?
So I think that there's a couple of things going on. First off, there have been a number of legitimate big media companies that have been floated as potential suitors. I have trouble seeing the Disneys or the Paramounts or the NBCs or any of those kind of companies being the one who would buy it. They don't need to.
I'm not shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if NBC did because of their affiliation with Peacock. I think that shows still a very strong link between NBC and what NBC is trying to do and what the WWE has to offer as far as content goes. But
it's content and it's licensing. And it's at least, and again, I'm by no means an expert on this stuff, but to me, part of the benefit of it is there's an arm's length relationship to it. WWE and NBC have worked closely together since the Dick Ebersol days. They've had any number of chances, especially when finances weren't good and it would have been attractive to buy WWE at any point along the way. I think the fact that they haven't also
but Vince didn't want to sell at that point. Vince was not convinced that he wanted
Vince
to
is
sell.
Enough of a businessman that if it had been worth his while and the opportunity had presented itself, he would have. Who knows what he would have gone on to do?
Because it would have meant losing that control that he wants. And that he thought, that the WWE could eventually become its own giant media entity like an NBC on its own. And I think he never wanted to give up that dream that he would become, the fourth form of media or something like that. NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, and then the WWE. He really felt like he could. I think at one point, he thought he would be bigger than Disney. I think he really felt that was going to happen. When the WWE had its giant building in downtown New York City and all that stuff, he was really believing that the WWE could be its own media giant and not have to be bought out by some other company.
I think he might have, but I think that among people, I would submit that among people that are in the business and people like us who follow it closely and who are pretty rabid fans of it, that there's always a tendency to overstate how relevant we are to the bigger world and to the bigger entertainment world. I think that, so for example, the current value of WWE is about $6.2 billion, give or take whatever the stock price is today. the People's Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, which was mentioned early on as, well, at one point they said it was a done deal, although they've walked back from that, is worth $620 billion. WWE in any kind of larger corporate entertainment case is a rounding error. And I think for those of and that's one of the reasons I don't necessarily think that that's the play. I think they get lost in the shuffle. I think that if there's anything to have been learned from the WCW experience with being sold to Turner and eventually the takeover by Warner Brothers and AOL and Time Warner, it's that, the carny world of pro wrestling does not fit easily into any kind of corporate structure. And it doesn't matter if it was Bill Watts saying off-color things back in the early 90s or if Disney, say, buys WWE tomorrow and Michael Hayes's past remarks come back to haunt him. Same deal. And I think that with WWE's and wrestling in general, their tendency to kind of push the envelope when it comes to good taste, all it takes is for another, awful Muhammad Hassan type angle to come along the pike, and that's it.
Right.
I think I think that those within WWE are aware of that, and I think that the real play here, since we've been talking a lot about Vince McMahon and control and who gets final say over things, I think that the play is one of two things ultimately. Either this is a gambit to ultimately go private, which has the added benefit of taking the WWE away from that kind of level of public scrutiny that a public company necessarily undergoes. There's no accountability to shareholders in the same way. There's no accountability to regulatory organizations in the same way. And WWE and Vince can go back to running things as he sees fit, and it can go back to being his playground for as long as he wants it to be. The other option, and I know that the People's Investment Fund angle was also as a vehicle to go private, would be for a consortium, for example, led by The Rock, who's best friends with current Soul CEO Nick Khan, whose sister happens to be the showrunner on Young Rock, to swoop in and lead with the appearance of a wrestling company staying within the wrestling family. I kind of think that if WWE does change ownership, that's the path that they would go. That, to me, that's the one that makes the most sense.
So you don't think the Saudi Arabia thing would actually happen?
I would never say never. I think that, for example, the Saudi Arabia thing, the same entity also owns the Live golf tournament. Live, or LIV, I haven't followed it closely enough. And they're having a heck of a time, despite having a pretty impressive roster of golfers, getting any kind of significant TV contracts because there's stigma attached to who owns it.
Yeah, I mean, they were only responsible for 9/11 and have never said or done anything to apologize for that. And every time our gas prices go up, it's nice to think about how wonderful Saudi Arabia is to us and how benevolent they are.
So and again, I have trouble from a creative standpoint seeing that working either. I can't see how.
You mean the women have to cover up, and that you can't have anyone who's homosexual, you can't have anyone that's anti-Saudi Arabia, and good luck if you're Jewish and want to do something.
In fairness, they did want Goldberg. They did want Goldberg. Paul Heyman has featured prominently on cards. I'll leave that part aside because I don't know nearly enough about that to speak about it intelligently. But I do think, for example, that the part with how women are portrayed, I think the fact that you would have talent like Sami Zayn or Kevin Owens who might have a moral objection. John Cena had a significant objection and declined to participate. Daniel Bryan, when he was there, also declined to participate. I think that it's a challenge from that standpoint. And the other thing is, I don't know, again, speaking as I won't say resident, but speaking as a frequent Canadian participant in the show, WWE its bread and butter has been hugely American jingoism. And that's, you look at Hulk Hogan beating the Iron Sheik.
I am a real American.
Yes. And a lot of that has been on the back of what today we would probably consider
Everything that Sergeant Slaughter did from like 1983 on out, everything
until he joined with the Iraqi army. It's the evil Arab heel is a trope in American wrestling, and I don't know how WWE and Hacksaw Duggan, Lex Luger, you can, the Undertaker at Survivor Series with an American flag stitched into his coat.
American Badass.
They've played this card forever, and I don't know how they could credibly do it under a foreign company owning them.
Yeah, no, and speaking as someone who's Jewish, and I know you are too, I would not ever watch the WWE if it were completely owned by Saudi Arabia. I didn't watch the pay-per-views that were in Saudi Arabia. I completely boycotted those. And it would be easy. I think, there's a lot of people who are kind of looking for a reason to stop watching the WWE. We always kind of hold out hope, like when, Triple H came back over and started doing things in the WWE after Vince McMahon, quote unquote, retired. That brought me back, but I'm always sort of like on the fence with how the WWE is, and if they moved over to Saudi Arabia, that would be the final straw for me. I would
see. I think from a content standpoint, if you were to make an argument for a network buying them, well, first off, I don't think it's necessary. I think there's plenty of examples where if a network wants wrestling on its airwaves, there's enough talented people out there and there's enough people with industry experience that you don't need to spend $6.2 billion to buy the biggest kid on the block. I mean, Tony Khan invented AEW from whole cloth and founded a home on TBS and TNT. The El Rey network, and I don't know what its penetration is, but I can bet it's not huge, was able to put Lucha Underground on the air for 5 years. And that, I think, still was a fantastic program and something really different in the market. MTV got into it about 20 years ago with Wrestle Society X. None of these things lasted forever, but if you were that desperate for cheap wrestling content, there's ways to do it that don't involve buying WWE. The one exception I would argue theoretically is maybe not Fox now that it's owned by Disney, but if a more conservative-leaning media outlet really wanted this kind of content and a way to kind of get its message out to a receptive mass audience, wrestling tends to lean that way anyway in terms of who its audience is, and it pitches to that. I mean, you can even go back to how guys like Daniel Bryan were more often portrayed as villains than heroes. To me, that's a more natural match. But even then, if you really wanted to go that route, you could probably buy EC3's Control Your Narrative promotion for a lot less money.
Yeah, you're probably right. So what is your prediction then? That's what's going to happen with all of this? Where is the WWE going to wind up?
I think it's going to be status quo for the next little while. I think that, to me, the play is to figure out some kind of going private transaction, whether that's partnering. I wouldn't take the Saudi Arabian government out of the mix just yet, but I think that a broader consortium with somebody like The Rock as a figurehead, if you wanted to go that route, to me, that's the one that makes the most sense. Okay. I think that the end game for this is to get away from the glare of public scrutiny that as a public company WWE is currently under. I mean, the other thing is Vince could change his mind tomorrow. He's been known to do that before. I think that the biggest challenge for them is they've basically turned over their whole board in fealty to Vince. I think that Stephanie McMahon, who kind of had the more kind of progressive voice within the culture of WWE, leaving is a huge blow to the company. I think something needs to happen on that front. I'm actually more interested to see where she goes from here. I think that if she is legitimately gone for any length of time, and she still is a significant shareholder as well, the vast majority of WWE shares are held by Vince and Linda still, and Stephanie and Shane, and Triple H for that matter. But I can't see him staying forever if she's gone.
Interesting. Well, we're going to have to see how it all shakes up. Why don't you give your column another plug, and we're done with today. It's another fast hour. Thanks to your participation, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me. It's Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz, slamwrestling.net. I just covered the latest developments. Keep checking because.
And that's a great article, by the way. Fast. I want to give an additional plug and say for you viewers who haven't read it, do read it because it's probably one of the most thoughtful articles about this change in possible ownership that I've read. And you really cover all the sides, just like you just did tonight. So, but even more in depth. So I really urge people to check it out because I think it's really excellent. So love having you on. Try to stay warm up north and, keep rooting for those Niners because I'm hoping for a Super Bowl victory out of
me too.
Everything. So,
stay dry.
Yes, thank you so much. And we'll have you on again soon. Thank you for joining us this week. Good night, everybody.
Good night.